My name is Mitch Donneberger. I am a creative director, illustrator, graphic designer, and brand developer here in Roxborough, Philadelphia. I actually don't know what's going on with this, but these are water towers. It says Upper Roxborough Basin's Industrial Coating Betterment, whatever that means. So I have a short story for you all today. Goes back to as early as 2010, which is right when I graduated college and started working at Mullen, which was the Pittsburgh office of a large advertising conglomerate owned by IPG. They've worked on a lot of really interesting stuff, much of which you've seen, like Zappos' famous puppet commercials. And we did, if you lived anywhere in the Pittsburgh area for the past 40 years, you've probably seen commercials for the Pittsburgh Zoo and Aquarium. That was something that we did. And as well, we also did all of the advertising for many, many years for Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield, who is now, actually, if you're in the Philadelphia area, you know who they are. They bought the man. One of Mullen's big clients that we handled was Magellan. And if you're old enough to remember, Magellan was the first to market with a vehicle navigation system, a GPS that allows people to operate turn-by-turn directions. In essence, you're never lost because wherever you are, the maps can determine your way back home. And they were very, very successful at that, especially GPS navigation units for individual cars really only launched in 2005. So this is about 5 years earlier. By that point, Magellan had pretty much consumed the market. It was them, Garmin, TomTom, and a couple of other names that are now mostly just mapping services. But they created a market segment for the most part, and then they dominated it. And these things were so popular that everybody had one. I even used a Magellan unit to navigate my way to Pittsburgh to move to school in 2006. And they were about the size of a small dog, and they were not very accurate, but the proof of the concept was there, and the experience really was there, so that you could. Ooh, it's a cardinal. 2 cardinals. They were the first to market really with this experience of using a GPS navigator. And by the time they reached us, and in 2010, they were really desperate to kind of expand into additional markets. They started developing GPS navigators for hikers, for marine use, for truckers, for robotics, for the military, for you name it. And essentially, they were trying to break out into it. But it was really only a function of the fact that they had saturated their own market space to a point where they had to invent new markets in order for them to keep growing. One of the unusual scenarios that I had is that because they were my client, I was there the day that Google announced that they were going to put turn-by-turn directions on Google Maps onto every smartphone in the country for free. The way the story goes is, a lot of the tech companies like Apple and Android used to have very large tech conferences. And those tech conferences were almost like rock star events. Like everybody I knew watched them. When Steve Jobs did a presentation, people that I didn't even know were into tech would have watched that thing live, and they would have been there to sort of see it and anticipate it and build the hype around it with everybody else. If you're old enough to remember 2008, the first iPhone, you couldn't even run apps, right? They wanted you to use web pages that were specially built for their smartphones. And they didn't even necessarily start an app store until they had to cave to the pressure with the iPhone 3GS. And even then, that was only like halfway through its lifetime. So companies like Magellan didn't really see smartphones as a threat. I think at the time, that was still when people were grandfathered into their unlimited text and data plans that used to exist for flip phones, which used WAP sites that were, I think the maximum that you could actually transmit on a WAP site was like 50K. So I'm not sure that because smartphones were so limited, Magellan and Garmin and the like even really saw them as threats necessarily. Just more dumb phones that got a little smarter. And a lot of people at that time had access to unlimited data, sort of not in the way that we have data that's metered now. These were mostly grandfathered in to plans that existed before smartphones were even considered. So, they were weird and lopsided where you'd get 90 minutes of talk per month, but you would have unlimited data and unlimited text messages. So a lot of the smartphone companies like Apple and Google figured out that that's a free hose that you can keep open. And anything that you could push through a 3G radio, they did. And the majority of that was just text. And Google was able to launch their sort of navigation turn-by-turn product as their step forward into kind of imagining what role the smartphone had in daily life from this point forward. Now, with the benefit of hindsight in 2026, we can look at our smartphones and think, oh, that's something that does photography, it does video, it does games, it does work, it does video chats, it does phone calls, it does texts, it does music, it does like everything. So this was the first broadside I think smartphone companies had towards an existing industry that they meant to disrupt. When that event happened, I got called into a meeting with the Magellan team. It was probably like 8 or 9 of us all sitting around a table. You could hear a pin drop on carpet. At the time, the business models for GPS navigators really hadn't been, I would say, gelled. When you operated one of, Magellan or TomTom's units, they charged you for maps every year. So if you wanted to have an update that had new roads or new points of interest or speed limits or where stop signs are or something like that, you had to pay roughly $600, and they would send you a CD that had a number of DRM protections on it so that you couldn't distribute it to other people. They sold discount maps that had no points of interest, which is like useful but not. So Google Maps was able to walk in and basically say, we're going to give you all of that same stuff with updated points of interests, with where all the stop signs are, with traffic, with any map update pretty much as soon as it happens, streaming for free with no ads, unlimited. And that was sort of how these tech companies were able to successfully disrupt these almost billion-dollar industries because they didn't have to make money. And I think Magellan understood that immediately, that they weren't going up against a tech brand who's trying to muscle into a territory. They were going up against somebody who had the same product they did, better, and were giving it away for free. And I think there's an extent where you just simply understand that you can't compete with that. One of the directors of product asked me in particular, because I was Mullen's sort of tech person, social media, internet, like that type of thing. And they asked me, like, do you think this is just a fad? And all I could say was, it's like, no, this is not a fad. This is not going away. So in the end, Mullen ended up actually closing its doors in Pittsburgh before Magellan did. And Magellan turned out okay. They, thankfully, because they had, extended into a lot of niches, as well as just sort of extending into doing maps, providing the map data to other companies like Google Maps, Apple Maps, and so forth. And, that is a testament to how important diversification is, especially for a product portfolio. You really never can rest on your laurels. Magellan was an extremely successful, extremely wealthy, extremely embedded company that was still overturned and disrupted in the matter of a year, less than that, maybe even a month, in an era where data is becoming sort of the point of convergence for a lot of companies. We're finding that tech companies are the ones that have and can sell and can collate that data. Things constantly churn, and you can never feel safe in a market, even if you're number one, because disruptors are able to turn basically everything that is a disadvantage in your business into an advantage on their end, because they just either don't have to make money, they don't have to provide the same level of service, or they have some technological advancement that makes life easier for them, but due to patents or due to process or even just due to customer expectation, you can't. So always keep an iron hot. Always keep looking to see who's finding you, because you really never know. So if you listen to this entire thing, thank you. I'm getting rained on now, so I'm probably going to stop. Please remember to like, subscribe. It really, actually really helps. And if you have any suggestions for a topic that you'd like me to cover, please put them down in the comments below. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Bye.